There is a parchment leaf sealed in a wooden chest inside a chapel in Axum, Ethiopia. No tourist is allowed near it. No scholar has photographed it in decades. It has not left that building in over 400 years, and the monk who guards it is forbidden to step outside for the rest of his life. What it contains is a story, a specific story. The one the church spent 17 centuries trying to make sure you would never read. Church leaders voted the Book of Enoch out of Scripture at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. They removed it, condemned it, called it dangerous. For most of Christian history, it was gone, erased so completely that Western Europe forgot it had ever existed. And then, in 1947, in the caves at Qumran, 11 separate copies surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls. 11. More copies than survived of most books that stayed in the Bible. A text the church buried, preserved in secret, older than any page of the New Testament. And when scholars finally translated the oldest fragments, they found the story. Not a myth, not a metaphor. The Book of Enoch describes 200 beings that came down out of the sky, landed on a specific mountain, swore an oath together, and gave humanity knowledge it was never supposed to have. It names them, it names their leader, it records exactly where they touched down and exactly what they taught. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text says, where on the map it points, and why access to the manuscripts that hold the full version has been restricted since 1974. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. This is not a story Enoch tells from a distance. It sits in chapters 6 through 16 of the text, the section scholars call the Book of the Watchers. And fragments of exactly these chapters were among the 11 Aramaic copies pulled from Qumran Cave 4, carbon dated, older than any gospel. The complete version survives only in the Ethiopian GES manuscripts kept at Axum. And the section is not written like prophecy. Michael Mibb, whose 1978 Oxford edition remains the standard scholarly English translation, noted that these chapters read less like vision and more like report. First person, past tense, named individuals, a named location, a sequence of events with cause and consequence, the way you'd write a record of something that actually happened. And this is where it gets disturbing. Apocalyptic literature deals in symbols, beasts, horns, numbers, dreams. This passage does the opposite. Chapter 6 opens not with a symbol, but with a head count. The text says, the beings numbered 200, and it says, they descended in the days of Jared, tying the event to a specific generation in a specific genealogy. It doesn't say a great host. It says 200. That's not the language of a dream. That's the language of a manifest. What we're looking at breaks into 3 parts: the arrival, the oath, and the knowledge. And each one is more specific than it has any right to be. The arrival comes first. Chapter 6, verse 6 records that the beings came down on the summit of Mount Hermon. Not a symbolic mountain, a real one. Mount Hermon still stands today on the border of Lebanon and Syria, over 9,000 feet high. Its peak snow-covered most of the year. The text gives a coordinate. You can drive to it. Apocalyptic writing does not hand you a location you can find on a map, because a symbol you can visit is a symbol that can be checked. Enoch gives you the checkable version, and it goes further. The text ties the descent to the days of Jared, and Jared is not a random name. In the Genesis genealogy, Jared is Enoch's own father. The event is dated by placing it inside the writer's own family line, 1 generation before his birth. That is not the timekeeping of legend. That is the timekeeping of a man recording something that happened close enough to touch in the memory of his own household. But the text doesn't stop there. The second part is the oath. Chapter 6 records that the leader of the 200, named Samyaza, was afraid. The text quotes him almost like testimony. He tells the others he fears he alone will bear the guilt of what they are about to do. So, the 200 bind themselves together with a mutual oath, each one sworn so that none can turn back without all of them sharing the blame. A pact made on the summit before the descent so that no member could later claim innocence. The text records the fear, the negotiation, and the binding, the internal mechanics of a conspiracy. That is not how myth describes rebellion. That is how a witness describes one. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. The third part is the knowledge. Chapter 8 lists what these beings taught, and it does not speak in vague terms. It assigns specific subjects to specific instructors. Azazel taught metalworking, the forging of blades, and the making of weapons. Others taught the cutting of roots, the properties of plants, the reading of the stars, the signs of the sun and moon, the working of enchantments. The text presents it as a curriculum, a syllabus of forbidden instruction, delivered to a species that the text says had none of it before. Metallurgy, astronomy, pharmacology, the exact technologies that separate a settled civilization from a wandering one, arriving all at once, taught by outsiders on a mountain to people who could not have developed them on their own. He wasn't interpreting signs, he was documenting what he encountered. The surface reading calls this the origin of sin. Read it as a technical account and it becomes something else. It becomes a record of the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge, precisely located, precisely dated, precisely attributed. And the text records a consequence. Chapter 7 says the union of these beings and human women produced offspring, a hybrid generation the text calls the Nephilim, described as enormous, consuming everything around them until the land could not sustain them. The mainstream reading files this under folklore, the tall-tale giants of an ancient imagination. But notice what the text is actually doing. It is describing a biological result of the descent, a new population that did not exist before the 200 arrived and could not be unmade after they did. The knowledge came, and something came with it. The text treats both as physical events with physical consequences, not as moral allegory. It records the cause, it records the effect. It never once tells you to read it as a symbol. Here's what the translators left out. The name of the mountain is not decoration. In the standard English editions, Mount Hermon is just a place name, rendered and moved past. But Hermon comes from the Semitic root FRM, the same root that gives the word Hiram. In Hebrew and Aramaic, Hiram means a ban, a thing devoted, cursed, set apart under a prohibition. Ancient readers heard it. The mountain is literally named the Mountain of the Ban. The text is telling you, in the name itself, that this is the place of the forbidden oath, the site placed under interdiction. Western editions print Hermon and say nothing. The GE's and Aramaic tradition preserves the pun as etiology. The place is named for the curse sworn on it. The text moves on, but the implication sits there. The location wasn't just where it happened. The location was marked, named, flagged as off-limits in the oldest layer of the language. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches what archaeology has actually found. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating a hill in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, less than 400 miles from Mount Hermon, in the same highland arc where the Watchers were said to have come down. What he uncovered rewrote the timeline of human history. Massive T-shaped stone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing tons, arranged in deliberate rings, carved with lifelike animals. Carbon dating put the oldest layers at around 9,600 BCE, 11,600 years old, 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, built by people who, according to every textbook, should not have been capable of it. No pottery, no metal tools, no agriculture, no writing. Hunter-gatherers who somehow possessed monumental engineering, arriving out of nowhere in the exact region the text points to. The old model of history was a straight line. First farming, then villages, then surplus, then temples. Göbekli Tepe destroys that line. The temple comes first, before the farms, before the tools that should have made it possible. Advanced knowledge appearing suddenly, in the right place, at the dawn of civilization, with no visible development behind it. The text describes outsiders bringing advanced knowledge to a specific highland region before humanity was ready for it. The science found advanced construction in that highland region before humanity should have been capable of it. The parallel is not metaphorical, it is structural. And there is a second detail that lands even harder. After roughly 1,500 years of use, Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned. It was deliberately buried. The builders packed their own temple with rubble and soil, carefully, on purpose, entombing it. Archaeologists still argue about why, but the pattern rhymes with the text with an uncomfortable precision. The knowledge came, it was used, and then it was covered over and sealed away, as if someone decided it should not remain in the open. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. The church removed Enoch from the canon, and the objection was never only doctrinal. The problem with the Watcher's story was that it made claims you could locate: a named mountain, a named event, a described transfer of specific knowledge. That is testable in a way pure allegory is not. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed the Enochic material as apocryphal and unworthy. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410 CE, argued the whole Watcher's account should be rejected, reinterpreting the sons of God as merely the human line of Seth to strip the descent of anything physical. The strategy was consistent. Take a text that reads like an event and reclassify it as a symbol. The Ethiopian church, operating independently of Rome, refused. It kept Enoch as full scripture, and it still does, one of 81 books in its canon. For over 1,000 years, while Europe forgot Enoch entirely, the complete Watcher's narrative survived only in GEs, in manuscripts held in Ethiopian churches. When the Scottish explorer, James Bruce, carried 3 of those manuscripts back to Europe in 1773, the reaction was hostility. 19th century scholars treated the descent chapters as primitive superstition, an embarrassment to be explained away rather than examined. But here is the detail most people never learn. The Bible itself quotes this banned book. The New Testament epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, quotes the Book of Enoch directly, by name, and calls Enoch a prophet. Jude reaches back into the exact text the church would later condemn, and treats its words as authoritative. And the second epistle of Peter, chapter 2, verse 4, refers to the same event: the angels who sinned, cast down, and held in chains of darkness until judgment, the fate of the Watchers, described inside the canonical Bible. The story the church voted out in 364 was already sitting in the scripture it voted to keep. They could remove the book, they could not remove the quotation. Now, here's where it gets active. Access to the Axum manuscripts, the ones holding the fullest version of these chapters, was restricted after 1974, when Ethiopia's revolution brought a government that classified church archives as protected national property. Requests by outside scholars for direct examination have been denied for decades. The single most complete manuscript tradition of the story the church tried to erase now sits behind 2 walls at once, church and state, in a chapel guarded by a monk who cannot leave. A text that survived every attempt to destroy it is, at this moment, less accessible than it was a century ago. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying 200 extraterrestrial beings landed on a mountain in the Bronze Age and handed humanity the blueprints for civilization. The Book of Enoch is not an archaeological field report. But what the text describes, when you read it carefully, keeps matching things that turned out to be real. A specific mountain that exists. A region where the oldest monumental architecture on Earth was later found. A sudden arrival of advanced knowledge with no development behind it in exactly that place. A book the church buried that the Bible itself quotes as prophecy. He had no way to know that the world's first temple lay buried a few hundred miles from the mountain he named. And yet the text sits there, in Ge'ez and Aramaic, in fragments pulled from Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the text names a real mountain, and if that mountain's name means the ban, and if the oldest advanced construction ever discovered sits in that same highland arc, thousands of years before it should exist, and if a book older than the Gospels describes outsiders bringing forbidden knowledge to exactly that place, then the story is not mythology. It is testimony. Enoch wrote down 200 names, one mountain, one oath, and one syllabus of forbidden knowledge with the flat, itemized tone you'd use filing an incident report. What he describes is either a symbol the church misread for 2 millennia and buried out of caution, or it is exactly what he says it is. An account of the day something came down and changed us. The parchment stays in Axum, behind stone, guarded by a man who cannot leave. The 11 Qumran copies sit under glass in Jerusalem. Mount Hermon still stands on the border, snow on its summit, its name still meaning the curse. And beneath a hill in Turkey, the oldest temple on earth still lies half buried, exactly where the text points. The mountain is still there. The name still means what it means. And the story the church never wanted told is still sitting in the book they could not destroy, saying exactly what Enoch said it did. Watch the investigation on screen now and see what else they took out of the record.